Hello and welcome to my video, Scary Cryptid Stories to Fall Asleep To. Tonight, I have a very special guest with us, ZakBabyTV. His link to his channel is in the description, and I highly recommend subscribing. That being said, let's fall asleep to some scary cryptid stories.
On a dark desert highway. Wait, that sounds like an old Eagles song. Let me rephrase that. While driving my rig through the desert late at night, trying to get back to the yard. There. That's better. Anyways, that's what we called the place where all the tractor trailers are kept. The yard. I saw something that terrified me, deep into the belly of my soul. I always thought it was a myth, a legend, something that truckers told themselves to keep themselves awake. But I was wrong. You see, was a cross-country truck driver for the Remington Trucking Company, based out of a very popular city in California. I am not married. I don't have any kids, so why not, right? I mean, I had everything I needed in my sleeper cab. A bed, a microwave, a mini fridge, a portable DVD player, and a coffee pot. I could wash clothes, get a shower, and get some real food at a truck stop. And there was always lot lizards hanging around for any other needs, so to speak. Don't judge. Besides, cross-country truck drivers make a lot of money. Anyways, you don't care about that. You see, I grew up in Camp Springs, Maryland, and every time my parents and I would go visit my aunt and uncle and their family in New Jersey, my father would always take the exit 7A on Jersey Turnpike. You know, the truck route. He would ride that thing all the way down to the exit 15, where it ends and merges back into the turnpike itself. He claimed it was faster. That's how I became infatuated with 18-wheelers. It scared the crap out of my mom sometimes, but she just closed her eyes and tried to sleep through it. I, on the other hand, loved it. Anyways, when I graduated high school, I knew I wanted to be a truck driver. So, I saved some money from my cashier job at Billy Burger's barn and enrolled at a local truck driving school. I completed the 6-week course and got my CDL. The school helped me find a job at the Remington Trucking Company. It was all the way across the country, but it was a good job, and I've been there ever since. Anyways, I packed my stuff, said goodbye to my parents, got in my car, and headed for sunny California. I worked here for a couple of years, drove their trucks, slept in the cab when I was on the road, slept in the shop when I was not, saved some money, and eventually bought my own rig. I used neon green Kentworth W900. I loved that rig. Well, that's enough about me. Let me tell you what happened. Now, what I'm about to tell you is something I have never told anyone before. Well, except for my therapist. I was heading home after driving a load of tables, chairs, and sitting booths to a bar in Florida. Some guy named John was remodeling the place. I got on Route 66 in Albuquerque and began my final stretch home. It was about 2:30 in the morning. It was a beautiful night out that night. The full moon shining down the road, not another vehicle in sight, just me and the white lines. I rolled the windows down, letting in the cool night desert air. I turned on the radio and tuned it into KIOT, Coyote 102.5 Classic Rock. They were actually playing some decent songs that night. I drove down the road, rocking out, enjoying the trip for about an hour and a half. The radio station then began to fade, so I just turned it off. I kept the windows down and just rolled on, with only the sound of the engine humming and the wheels winding on the road and nothing to look at but the white lines. Now, I'm not sure if you know about what's called white line fever. If you do, then great. If you don't, let me explain. It's basically highway hypnosis. It could happen to anyone, especially when you're driving at night. That's when the lines on the road go by so quickly in a flashing pattern, they hypnotize you. so you have no recollection of driving or anything that happened while you were in that altered state. No, I'm serious, look it up. Anyways, I caught the fever. The last thing I remember was turning off the radio, and suddenly, I was sitting at a truck stop about 100 miles away from the last place I remembered being. I blinked my eyes and shook my head. I needed coffee, I told myself. I rolled the windows up, shut off the truck, and went inside. I got the largest cup of coffee they had, added some cream and sugar, just how I liked it, paid for it, then went back out to my truck. I got in my truck, took a drink of the coffee, put the cup in the holder, put my seatbelt on, company rules after all, started the truck, wiped my eyes, put the truck in gear, and rolled out. I got back on the road and continued driving, drinking as much coffee as I possibly could, and try to stay awake. Now, as we all know, coffee is full of caffeine, which helps keep us awake. But did you know that too much caffeine will cause it to counteract itself and have the total opposite effect? Well, after about 10 minutes of pounding back that coffee, my eyes began to feel heavy. "Wake up, Mike. Fight through it. You can make it," I told myself. But I was wrong, again. As each mile marker passed, my eyes became heavier and heavier. I felt myself start to doze off. I shook my head to snap myself out of it, and reached for my coffee cup. In my sleepy state, I reached, but could not feel the cup. I took my eyes off the road for just a second, seeing the cup and reaching for it. I turned my hazy eyes back to the road, and that's when I saw it. The black dog. As I rolled down Route 66 heading west to California, eyes heavy, barely able to stay awake, my headlights beaming out into the darkness that stood before me, it appeared out of nowhere. Its eyes were blood red, its teeth were sharp and shiny, its coat was as black as the devil's soul, and its face was so hideous that I couldn't even describe it. That image will forever be burned into my subconscious mind. My headlight shined upon it, as it ran full speed down the center of the lane directly towards the front of my truck. "Holy shit!" I screamed as I hit on the brakes and whipping the cab hard to the right. My front passenger's steering tire then went off the side of the road, falling a few inches into the grass and heading straight for the ditch. My rear driving wheels were next to follow. In my panicked state, I tried correcting the turn by whipping the cab hard to the left. I thought I was successful until momentum took over, causing the trailer to slam hard into the driver's side rear drive tires, causing the cab to slide diagonally down the road. I then felt the entire truck start to flip over on its side. I said a little prayer, put my hands over my eyes, and let whatever was going to happen, happen. I screamed as the truck went over and slammed hard on the ground, flinging me like a rag doll. Thank God I was wearing my seatbelt. I don't even want to think what may have happened if I wasn't wearing it. Always wear your seatbelt. Anyways, the truck then slid about 30 yards, but never went into the ditch. It almost did, but thankfully, it did not. The sound of glass breaking, grinding metal filled the air, as well as thick gray smoke and the smell of oil and other fluids from the truck's engine. Luckily, the gas tank was not damaged in the crash. When it was over, I just laid there, suspended almost upside down in the air, still in my seatbelt. Thankful to be alive, I reached up, grabbed the "oh shit" bar, and unlocked my seatbelt. My legs hit the gear shift as my body fell. I maneuvered my legs off of it, still holding on to the bar, and stood on top of the broken glass from the passenger side window, letting go of the bar. Now what happened next completely terrifies me. I was about to call dispatch when I heard it. Now, I've heard other truckers talk about seeing the black dog and the wreck that followed, but I never heard anything like what happened to me. Maybe they left this part out, I don't know. Because this was totally messed up. As I stood there, I began to hear a low growling sound that intensified with every passing second until it was almost at a deafening tone. I then heard a loud thud, followed by scratching on the driver's side door right above me. I'm glad I rolled my windows up when I left the truck stop, I thought, as that was the only window not cracked or broken. I saw bright red lights shoot across the window. At first, I thought they were lights, but they were not. "What the hell is that?" I said, followed by another loud thud on the ground. Now, for some reason, I turned and looked out the windshield, which was severely cracked, and saw two bright red eyes staring directly at me through the cracked windshield. This thing was mere inches away from me. Its face then came into focus. Its snout was pulsating as it opened its mouth, revealing row after row of immensely white teeth. No, not teeth. Fangs. It was drooling and foaming at the mouth. I screamed and jumped between the driver's seat and the passenger seat into the sleeper, which was totally destroyed, by the way. My shoulder landed hard on the edge of the mini fridge. I thought I broke it. I screamed out in pain. I grabbed my shoulder and sat down on top of the now broken microwave. I hunched over as far as I could and ducked my head down so I couldn't be seen. The dog then barked the most loudest and most demonic evil bark that I've ever heard. Worse than those evil dogs in the 80s horror movie Devil Dogs. Now, I'm not a very religious person. I mean, I believe in God, carry a Bible with me on long trips and all that good stuff. But I don't go to church and I've never really read the Bible. But at this moment in time, I wish I had. Anyways, I saw the Bible amidst all the rubble. I picked it up, held it close to my chest, and prayed and prayed and prayed for this thing to go away. It did not go away. Periodically, I would stick my head up above the side of the passenger seat and see it standing there, growling and barking, throughout the next 3.5 hours. Now, as I said before, I never told anyone this story, besides my therapist, and a guy named Rooster. You see, I had been having night terrors because of it. I would wake up screaming in the middle of the night about 3 to 4 times a week. It traumatized me so much that I stopped driving at night in fear of seeing that dog. I knew I needed help, so I called a therapist. I told her this story and told her about my night terrors. She diagnosed me with PTSD and prescribed me Zoloft once a day. I take it at night since it makes me drowsy. Anyways, it helps a little bit. I don't wake up screaming half as much. She also suggested that instead of keeping the whole traumatic experience bottled up inside me, that I should tell as many people as possible about what happened. So that's what I'm doing here. Anyways, back to the story. Like I was saying, the dog stood there for 3.5 hours. Suddenly, I heard the sound of something heavy hitting the glass. I stuck my head above the seat one last time to see the dog rush towards the glass, hitting its head hard against it, cracking it a little more. It stepped back, letting out an ear-piercing growl, its eyes glowing brighter as it charged the glass once again, this time breaking through it. Pieces of glass shot everywhere. I screamed as I fell back in my sitting position, holding the Bible close, and began reciting the Lord's Prayer. I was completely scared shitless. I then saw its head rise above the passenger seat and staring directly at me, eyes glowing, fangs showing, and mouth foaming. It snarled, drew back, and was just about to pounce on me when it let out this ear-piercing shriek of pain and began shaking violently. Thick gray smoke then began pouring out of its eye sockets, its ears, and its mouth. I screamed again. As I did, I saw that dog explode into a cloud of thick gray smoke and disappear within thin air. I cleared the smoke with my hand, coughing a little, only to realize that the sun was beginning to rise. Sunlight must kill this thing, I thought. I had never been so glad to see the sunrise in my life. The dog was gone. "What the hell?" I said, completely exhausted. I took a deep breath as my fear began to subside. I sat the Bible on the microwave next to me and pulled out my cell phone. I then called dispatch. I gave them my location and told them I flipped my truck and how long I had been out there. I didn't tell them what really happened. Dispatch said that they would send out a recovery rotator truck and heavy-duty tow truck. I thanked them and ended the conversation, putting my phone back in my pocket. I then took a deep breath, slowly crept over the passenger seat, reached up and grabbed the CB. I pressed the button and said, "Breaker 19, this is Vanilla Mike. I am 1034 in need of assistance. Anyone got their ears on out there? Come back." Hoping it still worked. Shortly after I put out that call on the radio, I got a response. "Yeah, Vanilla Mike, this is Red Rooster. I hear you, 1034. What's your 20? I then gave him my location. That's what 20 means in trucker lingo. Anyways, about 30 minutes went by when I heard the sound of air brakes. I stood up on the side of the seat, looked over the driver's seat window to see a red 18-wheeler stop on the shoulder of the road right behind my truck. I then climbed out of the window, maneuvering over the hood, slid down to the ground below, walked around the front of my truck and began walking over towards the red truck. The long red-haired older gentleman climbed out of the cab, met me halfway and shook my hand. We introduced ourselves to each other. He reminded me of Willie Nelson, wearing a cowboy hat and a pair of cowboy boots. Anyways, he looked at my truck, then asked what happened. I told him. "Yep, I seen that black sumbitch back in 73, dead of night, came out of nowhere, jackknifed my rig, almost lost my load and my whole life. Ugly little sucker. It woke me the hell up though." "You alright?" he asked. "Yes, I'm fine. Just a little shaken up," I answered. My shoulder was killing me. Anyways, he then invited me to sit in his truck and said that he would wait with me until the recovery truck arrived. We talked for about 2 hours about everything under the sun, drinking coffee, telling jokes, and laughing. He had his own coffee maker. Anyways, the recovery truck and the tow truck finally arrived. It was about 10:30 at that point. It took them 4.5 hours to get my truck upright. The cops had to shut down the westbound lane to do so, and they gave me a ticket for inattentive driving. I just paid it. The judge wouldn't believe me anyways. Now, once my truck was back upright and I secured a ride home from the tow truck driver, I said goodbye to Rooster. He climbed in his truck, hit the horn a couple of times, and just rolled on. He was a good man. I hope our paths cross again one day, under better circumstances, of course. Anyways, I took time to look at the damage. It was massive. I was lucky to be alive. If I would have went left and fell on the driver's side, I would have surely died. That's it. I'm done, I told myself. Once was enough for me. I never stepped foot in a rig again. The owner of the trucking company was nice enough to have the truck towed back to the shop at his expense. I signed it over to him and he put it, damaged and all, in the side of the yard of the shop with a sign across the windshield that reads, "Believe the myth." Now, even though I don't drive or ride in a truck anymore, I still work there. I am now in charge of dispatch. The old dispatcher took my job. Good luck to him. Anyways, it pays a lot less money, but I'm okay with that. I don't have to worry about seeing that dog anymore. Now, I assign drivers their loads, provide mapping information, ensure the product is loaded properly, as well as many other things. I rent a room at the Flophouse down the street. The room is about as big as my sleeper cab was, maybe a little bigger. There's a bed, a dresser, a lamp, and a rolling clothes rack like you see in the laundromats in the corner. I had to buy a new mini fridge, a new microwave, and a new coffee pot, as they were all damaged in the crash. I also bought a small flat-screen TV and a DVD player. The Flophouse didn't have cable. Anyways, there's a shared bathroom with 3 showers side by side at the end of the hall, and a couple coin-operated washer and dryers downstairs. It's really not that bad. I don't mess with lot lizards anymore. No, I got a real girlfriend named Natasha. I met her at Chelsea's restaurant. My shoulder is doing fine. It was just badly bruised. Now, in closing, I would just like to say to any of you truckers out there, if you feel your eyes getting heavy and it's hard to focus on the road, please promise me that you'll stop. Pull over on the side of the road, stop at a gas station, stop somewhere. Because the black dog is no myth. It's no legend. No. That dog is real. I've seen it. And it's got one hell of a bite.
I had recently moved to an undeveloped area of town due to having landed a new job. My new job paid slightly less than the one I'd recently had, but this one would allow me more time off and better benefits. I had just purchased a new home, which was in a neighborhood with no other homes completed, so it was just me in a large lot with many unfinished homes around me. I have a large dog named Rocky, and he needs his walks or he destroys my home with excitement. Walks in this neighborhood are pretty awesome, since it's just us in this area. The neighborhood is surrounded by dense woods, which can be unnerving at night, but our walks are typically done before the sun would set. I remember one day I was working longer than normal, and I got back home a few hours later. I could see Rocky bouncing around the window when I pulled into the driveway. I went inside to see the living room in a decent-sized mess, and Rocky jumping all over me. Okay, let's get you out for a walk, I said. We began our walk like we normally do, but it's much later, and I didn't bring a flashlight. I normally don't bring one, so I didn't even think about it. The sun had set, but there was a little bit of light left that allowed us just to see enough to be okay. The neighborhood was still under construction. Most lots either had partial homes built or just an empty lot. About halfway through our walk, I heard movement come from inside one of the partial homes that bordered the woods. It was enough to startle both me and Rocky, and we stopped and looked towards the partial home in hopes to see what made that noise. The sun at this point had set more, and the ambient light had gone down significantly. I couldn't see anything, but Rocky was losing his mind. He could clearly see something I couldn't. I figured it was just a raccoon or some kind of small mammal, so I urged Rocky to continue on our walk. But he was fixated, unlike I'd ever seen him before. His hair stood up on his back, and he let out a low growl. I had to practically pick him up to get him moving, but when I did, I noticed movement coming from inside the half-built home. Whatever it wasn't small. I stopped and looked back at the house to satisfy my curiosity of what was inside the home. I began to walk towards the home when Rocky let out a whine. I'd never heard Rocky whine other than needing food. Something about what was inside was legitimately scaring my dog. I changed directions and began to pull Rocky along our walk, and he followed, but still kept his focus on the home. We were a good distance away from our house, and it was beginning to get really dark. I didn't want to be out here with whatever that thing was. As we continued on our walk, we heard a blood-curdling scream coming from behind us. Right around the area of that house, we saw that thing inside. The scream sounded human, so I figured that some hobo was just living in one of these houses. The scream had caused both me and Rocky to quicken our pace. We were about 100 yards from our house when, to my surprise, a car came driving down this road. Like I said, this area was brand new, and no other person lived in this area other than me, so to see a car was quite surprising, but we were glad to see someone else. The car's headlights had illuminated a good distance for us, which made me and Rocky feel somewhat better. As the car was passing us, the car had stopped. The person driving the car had rolled down the window. It was an older man, and he had a heavy accent. He asked me, "Do y'all see that thing following y'all?" he said. His accent was heavy, and I couldn't quite understand, so I asked him to repeat. He said, "Do y'all see that thing following y'all?" I quickly turned around, and to my surprise, I saw it. About 30 yards behind us, the car's headlights had illuminated some kind of creature that was standing on 2 legs. The creature was tall and pale. Its head was quite large, and its face lacked features. I responded to the man, "I don't know what that is," and he responded likewise. The man turned on his high beams, which seemed to startle the creature, but instead of running off on 2 legs, this thing dropped down on all 4s and ran into the woods. The old man and I just looked at each other. It was as if we both knew we saw something that we shouldn't have. The old man offered us a ride to where we needed to go, but I just told him that we just lived down the road a little bit and that we should be fine. The old man told us to be safe, and he drove off. Rocky and I hurried back into our house and made it back safely. I don't know what it was that we saw. It looked like an alien, but it was quite tall and it was quite fast. I don't know if aliens running on all 4s. Its description and movement fit more that of the rake, which, if that is the case, I'm certainly grateful that that old man pulled up behind us with his car. He definitely saved our lives. Last week I went camping on the Idaho-Wyoming border in hopes of camping on the Palisades Reservoir. Like most times I go camping there, most, if not all the sites, had already been filled due to it being a popular camping spot with those with boats and other toys. I had to pitch my camp a good distance away in the free area, but I'd still be able to access the waterfront with only a 20-minute walk. My first night was interesting. Campers were all over, but I was able to be tucked away just enough in the tree line that I was able to maintain some form of privacy. Normally, privacy here doesn't mean you won't hear anyone, just out of the sheer number of campers. Tonight was no different, and I was able to hear low sounds of music and other sounds coming from other campsites. Nothing really annoyed me until I heard what sounded like screaming coming from a good ways away. I checked my phone to see that it was 2 in the morning. Either there were some inconsiderate campers, or there was something wrong. Like I said, there were a ton of campers out here, and I figured that whoever it was would find someone much closer to help them. I woke up the next morning and made breakfast. I had noticed that a considerable amount of campers had left since the night before. I took my breakfast to go, and I walked down by the waterfront to see that even more campers had left. I was confused to see that the police were questioning some of the campers as they were packing up. I tried my best not to eavesdrop, but I was also curious to see why all these great camping spots were now opened. I glanced over to see an ambulance next to these 3 tents that looked destroyed. I must have lost track of what I was doing, and an official told me that I needed to step back. I hiked back to my site and waited. Later in the day I noticed that not only did the campers leave, but also did the camping officials. I hiked back down to the water, and the area was mostly deserted. There was only a tent here or there, and it simply begged me to move my tent down by the water. I hiked back and started packing up my site, and began moving my site down to the water. I'd never seen this before, and I was going to make sure to capitalize on this good fortune. However, I was curious as to why everyone had left. I figured that there might have been a drowning or a boating accident, and that the authorities asked everyone involved to leave or something. I was able to get my campsite set up and ready before the night came. I got a nice fire going. It was summertime, but there wasn't a fire ban, so having a fire was okay. I noticed that the other campsites didn't have a fire, which I thought was weird. I guess they went to bed early. I enjoyed myself in my recently acquired campsite and watched the water reach the shore next to my campfire. It was getting pretty late, so I decided to call it a night. I put out the fire and went to bed in my tent. I was awakened again by screaming, but this time the screams sounded much closer. I sat up on my sleeping bag and I could hear movement just outside my campsite. I stepped outside of my tent and shined my flashlight where I heard the screaming. At first, I thought the screams were coming from other campers, but when I shone my light around, I noticed that the screams were coming from the dark woods. I decided that sleeping outside in the tent was no longer a good idea, so I spent the night in my truck. I woke up the next morning to the authorities tapping on my truck. I shot up and stepped outside the truck to greet the authorities when I saw that my tent had been destroyed. I could tell that the authorities were surprised to see me in my trunk and not inside my tent. My tent had been destroyed by something with claws of some kind. I didn't leave any food out, so I was surprised to see that there were some animals attracted to my campsite. I asked the authorities, what kind of animals did this? The authorities just shook their heads and said, it wasn't an animal, and that I was lucky that whatever it was didn't look inside the truck.
Back in the long-forgotten year of 1988, I was 13, spending my first time going on an overnight camping trip. Back in those days, there was limited options for entertainment. My parents were going to go crazy with me running around the house for the entire summer. They put together some money to send me away for a trip to the lake for 3 days. I packed up my bags right away, feeling excited. I was finally being trusted going somewhere overnight without my parents. The group was made of 6 girls all around the same age with 2 adults as supervisors. They held 3-day camping trips every weekend in the summer and normally had a bigger turnaround. For whatever reason, we had a smaller group, which was fine by the 2 adults taking care of us. Herding 6 barely teenage girls around the woods was a hard enough job. The first day went smooth, despite our bursts of energy threatening to sabotage the trip. We each got into pairs as a tent buddy. We needed to set up 4 tents on our own, or mostly on our own. Katie was my tent buddy. We started off strong setting up, but needed help putting the last few poles into the packed dirt. I knew Katie from school, but wasn't in the same class as her. She was a shy girl. Still, we got along just fine. The other girls started to tease her because Katie was the youngest yet the biggest girl out of all of us. In that moment, I decided to defend her during the weekend, and we kept working away at the tent, ignoring the other girls, until they lost interest. Proud of our work setting up the tent, we treated each other to treats we stashed away in our bags. After lunch, we finished and cleaned up. The group went down to the lake to swim. Hours went by. All 6 of us started to get along, and by the time we needed to return back to camp for dinner, we were all so exhausted we let the adult supervision teach us important facts along the way. Things like what poison ivy looks like, how to know if some wild animals are in the area, stuff that we should know, but was always good to be reminded even if summer wasn't for learning. Drew wanted us to roast hot dogs for our dinner. He was finding it difficult to light a fire using a flint kit. He wanted to teach us a new skill. After a few minutes of a pack of hungry girls complaining, he gave up, digging out a lighter instead. Stacy was our other supervisor. She was a pretty girl, only about 20. When you're 13, that seems pretty old. Her nails painted cute colors us girls loved. She didn't seem to be the outdoorsy type of girl. Drew might have needed help keeping all the girls in check and called in some backup. Drew was a youth pastor at the church, ran for the camping trips. Even so, he did not make us say grace before eating, or even have any religious activities planned for us. He let us stuff ourselves, and when dark came, we told scary stories around the fire. It was only 9 p.m. when he made all of us go to bed, but from the activity day our little bodies felt like it was much later. Each of us went to our tents with almost no complaints about bedtime. I had fallen asleep very easily. Only an hour passed before Katie woke me up, nervously shuffling in her sleeping bag. "Are you all right?" I asked her in a low whisper. "Sorry, did I wake you up?" she replied back in the dark. "Nah," I lied. I wondered if she needed to go to the washroom. A porta potty was set up pretty close by. "Do you need to go pee?" I asked her. I couldn't see her in the dark. I rustled around looking for my flashlight. I didn't need the go, but I didn't mind walking down with her if she was scared. Yeah, do you think that story Drew told us had any truth to it? She asked sheepishly. The smiling man in the woods? Nah, he's just making stuff up. If the woods were dangerous, our parents wouldn't let us go. I heard her head move against her sleeping bag, nodding at my words. Turning on the right, I helped her out of the tent for a quick pee run. Some giggling came from the tent beside us. Jane and Betty talked non-stop all day. They might have chatted all night if someone didn't stop them. I was tempted to jump at their tent to scare them, but left it alone. They would regret staying up all night tomorrow morning, and I didn't want to get in any trouble for pulling a prank. Katie was still scared. I took her by the hand and held the flashlight in my other. I even stood guard outside the porta potty while she took care of her business just in case. Katie had older siblings, but I didn't. She seemed lonely and homesick already. I was trying my best to act like an older sister to comfort her. In the brush, I thought I saw yellow eyes flicker looking at me. Shining the flashlight in the direction of the eyes, I saw nothing. Just forest animals wondering what we were doing. I was a little scared of coming across a bear or something along those lines. Ghost stories or crazy serial killers in the woods didn't scare me in that moment. The forest sounded like how a forest should be at night. Spooky trees creaking and all. Just as Katie came out, ready to head back, a scream cutting through the night made us freeze in fear. It came from the direction of the camp. The low fire gave us enough light to sort of make out the tents and the dark figure stalking around our campsite. Watching in horror, the figure went over Drew's tent, ripping it open and dragging Stacy out by the leg. I grabbed Katie, holding her to me, terrified at what was going on. Stacy fought the figure with everything that she had. She thrashed and tossed anything within arm's reach towards the figure's face. Drew came out of the tent, tackling the person, or thing, off of her. Stacy got up and ran. At first, I thought she left everyone behind. Instead, she found the axe for firewood, using it on her attacker. It was too much for me. I turned my head away, body shaking, unable to keep watching the horrible sight. Katie was crying as well, holding each other, waiting for an adult to come and tell us everything was all right. We had only been gone for a few minutes. How did everything go so wrong so fast? We both screamed when we heard footsteps coming closer a few minutes later. Opening my eyes, I saw it was Stacy, black staining her shirt. She smelled like 10-day-old rotting fish, and it made me gag. In her hand was the axe covered with more of that rancid-smelling black liquid. Betty and Jane beside her, holding each other while crying and shaking like me and Katie. Come on, if we follow the trail, we'll hit Mr. Bobby's farmhouse. He has a phone, Stacy said, trying to sound strong, but her voice came out weak and shaking. Where's Mr. Drew and Nina and... I started to say the other names of our missing campmates, but my throat closed up and only sob came out. I knew what happened to them. I just couldn't say it. They're gone. Come on. Using her free arm, Stacy scooped it behind us to get us to start walking down the trail as fast as our small legs would carry us. Once we started walking, Stacy kept both hands on the axe, and I was in front with both hands on the flashlight guiding our way as Katie kept her arms around my waist. Betty and Jane still sobbing behind us no matter how hard they tried to choke it down. My hands shook. Every sound made me think something was just beyond the trees waiting to jump out and take us. My eyes darted around trying to see everything at once, making me dizzy. The farmhouse was a half-an-hour walk away at the best of times. Drew's car was closer. I wondered why Stacy wasn't leading us there. I assumed that Drew had his keys on him when the figure took him, or Stacy didn't want to stay at the camp long enough to find them. When you're so young and scared, you don't think about those other escape plans. You only accept what the adult tells you. I got another whiff of that horrible rotten fish smell when the wind shifted. Gagging and eyes watering, I refused to stop. Minutes passed and the smell decreased enough to make me stop choking on the bile rising in my throat. It was only then that I noticed Betty was the only one still sobbing. Stacy noticed it at the same time. We both turned to look, only seeing the small brown-haired girl, and Jane was gone without a trace. "Run!" Stacy's shout got us moving. She grabbed Betty roughly, dragging her along with her arm. The girl screaming in fear. Katie was the slowest of us. She was dragging me behind. Still, I kept one arm around her, trying my best to get her to go a little bit faster, when the other dark shape came out of the trees directly in front of Stacy. She didn't stop. She let out a startling scream, swinging the axe at the figure's head. I saw a flash of glowing yellow eyes before hearing the awful crack of the axe connecting to its skull. It collapsed to the trail. Stacy wasted no time yanking the blade out that was stuck in the thing's skull. I shone my flashlight trying to get a better look at the figure. Black blood like oil oozing from the head wound. The face was pitch dark and flat with no nose. Its skin so dark and wet looking. More of that smell came drifting over, causing Katie to start gagging this time. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't human. That much I knew. We didn't even have time to guess what it was before another one came out of the trees. Stacy clipped it with her axe, making it scream and dart away. She was breathing hard. If more things came at us, I didn't think we would make it. Stacy was the only person, and she had to defend 3 scared girls. Even so, she looked ready to do it. Another creature came at us. Sadly, while Stacy was dealing with the first one, 2 more came. In seconds, they grabbed Betty, dragging her screaming into the woods. Stacy screamed and cursed at them, pain across her face that she didn't keep the girl safe. More and more those creatures started to appear and poking their heads from the trees in front of us. She gave us a look. No words, just a look. And I knew what it meant and what to do. She ran towards the monsters, axe in hand, and me and Katie ran back down the trail towards the camp, knowing we would never get past the wall of pitch-black dark monsters. Stacy gave us some time, and we weren't going to waste it. Running hard, Katie kept up with me, tears pouring down her face. I wanted to cry, but I knew if I gave in to that, I wouldn't be able to keep going. Lungs burning, we ran until we saw the orange light of the fire. I planned to get the hot dog pokers, or, well, anything I could use as a weapon. For a half second, I felt almost safe. Maybe if I found the keys, we could find the car and hide inside if we couldn't drive it. Maybe, just maybe, Stacy would also get away, and we could all go together. All my hopes were crushed when Katie stumbled, falling hard. I was running so fast I accidentally left her behind for a few paces before skidding to a stop to go back for her. A dark monster took it as a chance to swoop in and try to drag her away. I went by Stacy's example. I let out a war cry that would have sounded funny in any other situation. Jumping on the creature's back, I hit it with the flashlight as hard as I could, as many times as possible, aiming for its head. Our struggling only lasted a few seconds. I was tossed off its back onto the hard ground. Looking at me with yellow eyes set in its dark face, it decided that we weren't worth it and scuffled off. I had saved us for the moment. I needed to get Katie up and moving back to camp and to get a better weapon. My stomach turned when I looked at her. A long gash on her stomach was pouring blood on the ground. I shook my head to clear it, refusing to give up. Grabbing under her arms and started to drag her towards the camp and towards the dim orange light of the fire. I knew some basic first aid, but already was sure that this was far beyond what I could help with. Leaving her behind was not an option just yet. Horrible wound or not, I needed to at least try to help her. I was sweating and panting by this time I got her by the fire. I kept repeating how sorry I was that I needed to drag her and hurting her along the way doing so. She was very brave and kept her sobs very low for my sake. I started digging around in Drew's ruined tent. I started to look for anything of use. Just normal camping gear. No weapons I could see or car keys. I grabbed the first aid kit, another flashlight, and some scissors. I was hoping to find a knife of some sort. No such luck. I avoided the other tents. I could smell the blood mixed with the fishy rot and didn't want to know what horrible awaited me inside. I tried to clean Katie up a little bit, but it was well over my head. I didn't want to hurt her by touching her too much. Seeing that amount of blood nearly made me sick. I didn't even know of the fact. I felt faint seeing blood until that point. I was so stressed I wasn't even aware of someone walking up to our camp until they were just outside the light of our embers. My body jolted into action as I grabbed the scissors in one hand and the hot dog stick in the other. The black body-soaked axe came into view, and for a brief moment, I thought Stacy had made it back. But that was not the case. A man came into the light, dressed in a baggy clothing that hung loose on his thin frame. Long, straight white hair was half-heartedly pulled back into a low ponytail, but most of it still stayed on his face, making it hard to see his features. "Who?" I choked. "Two left. Good for you." Ignoring me, he sat down next to the fire pit and started placing wood onto it, trying to make it going again. I was so shocked at his calm manner I couldn't react. A soft cry came from Katie, brought me back to my senses. "I need help. My friend is hurt, and there are things in the woods eating everyone." "Stacy had the axe. Is she all right? Did you see her? Please tell me something." "No. Please help Katie first. She's really hurt, and I'm scared that there's a lot of blood, and I don't..." Once the words started, they just kept coming. They poured out of me without any thought of what I was saying. I was having a meltdown. As I kept talking, the man started to stiffen around the sounds just pouring out towards him. He raised his hand to make me stop speaking, and the other on his forehead as if in pain. When I didn't stop pleading, he snapped first.
"Stop talking."
His voice was so loud it kept echoing throughout the woods for a few seconds. I was frozen in fear by the sound and dropped all my makeshift weapons. I had never had an adult just snap at me like he just did. A 10-second passed between us. Rubbing his temple, I saw regret flutter over his face from being angry with me. It only lasted a second before he regained his tired, worn-out look. I went over to Katie about ready to burst from stress when he also came over. He held a hand over her wound. I looked in amazement as most of her blood just faded with a wave of his hand, and her gash closed a little bit. Not by much, but it looked better than before. "Who? What?" I asked in a very small voice just in case he would yell again. With a long-suffering sign, he went back to the fire, back towards me. "I have a migraine. Your friend may last through the night if she's lucky." "What about Stacy? Did you see her?" "You don't need to worry about her anymore." His cold tone nearly brought me to tears. I wanted nothing more than to just start crying and shouting, but Katie still needed me. This man might be able to help us. Breaking down wouldn't help us get out of there. Glancing up, I saw yellow eyes in the dark and I trembled. The creature saw us, head poking out from the trees a few feet away, drool dripping from the open mouth of sharp teeth. When it saw the man next to the fire, its eyes widened in fear and darted back into the woods. "Those monsters are scared of you," I stated after I saw the strange sight. Looking over his shoulder at me with his eyes narrowed. He didn't want to talk, but he didn't want to hear me asking questions. Until I got some answers, one of those things was going to happen. I'm like their boss. They need to follow certain rules, and they broke the first one. Only 7 of them should be in this area. It was 10, but I cut the number down as a punishment. I've killed the extras, so right now, 7 are in the woods," he explained. He sounded tired for how young he looked under the bleached white hair. I wondered if he was sick or something. "The other rule is they could only kill 1 human per night. So, 7 of them can kill 7 humans. So far, they've killed 6. My throat caught again, gripping Katie's hand. I hope it comforted her enough to calm her down after hearing such news. We were the last 2 left of our group, fear seeping into my bones, making me feel cold even if the flames started to rise in the fire pit. They can still kill one more, right? I asked hoarsely. He didn't reply. He only gave me another look over his shoulder to confirm that fact. Even after that sunk in, I felt a little sense of relief. The monsters wouldn't attack us. I could just stay there or around the man to be safe. Looking back down at Katie, my hope fluttered away. Unless he could heal her more, there was a very big chance she wouldn't make it through the night. I needed to get to the farmhouse and get to a phone for help. Can you carry her for me? We need to get out of here. She'll die if I don't call someone to help her, and I can't go alone through the woods with those monsters. My voice started out strong, but soon it went back to a begging and pleading tone. I'm staying here all night. My head is killing me. My eyes darted to the axe, tempted to threaten him with it until he listened. If he could kill those monsters in the woods, I had no chance of getting him to go along with my plan. If I went, I might die before I got help. If I stayed, Katie might die before sunrise. The world was so unfair at that point. I held her hand so tight it must have hurt my friend, but she didn't complain. Stay here with me, Katie said finally in a weak voice. I looked down at her, really wanting nothing more than to do just that. Staying meant risking her life. I wondered if she was considering that when she asked me. She might have just wanted someone by her side while she was scared and in pain. Please, can't you heal her? I begged once again. I've done as much as I can. It's not my job to help humans. I don't care which one of you lives, only that those creatures don't break their last rule and I'm forced to kill them. You should kill them all. They killed... I couldn't get the words out. I thought of Stacy and Drew and the girls I spent with that day. They were gone, and there was nothing that I could do about it aside from hate the ones that murdered them. It's just their nature. Although, that fact might be impossible for a human to understand. You have been on top of the food chain for so long, you think it's a tragedy when one of you dies compared to another species. It's just how life is. My gut stirred with a white-hot rage. I wanted to attack the man in front of us, whoever he was. I knew giving in to my emotions wouldn't help. I just let myself cry, and held Katie's hand, hoping it felt like she had a sibling with her for that moment. I knew what my decision was, and needed to get all the crying out before I followed through with it. You could kill her, you know. That way you would... I didn't let him finish. I tossed whatever was close to me at his head. He raised a hand to deflect the attack, making the scissors fly off into the darkness. I thought that he was going to be angry with me, but he just looked at me a little stunned at my reaction. I'm not killing her. Katie is a sweet girl who is going to live a long life and do so many good things. She's not dying tonight, and I'm making sure of that. Standing up, I went over to the axe, putting my hand around it that I could barely fit around the handle. It was heavy for me, but I would need to manage. Rubbing the tears from my eyes, I looked around for the flashlight ready to leave for the farmhouse. Grabbing it, ready to go, the man stopped me by standing in my way. What's your name? He asked, and made me stop and blink. Savannah, I told him, not knowing why he asked. I'm Liren. I'll give you a little bit of help. Earring? I misheard his name. No, Lee... Never mind. Let me borrow the axe. I pulled it away from him defensively. I didn't want to trust him after he treated us, but didn't have any other options. Letting him take the axe, he held it in one hand. In the other, he ran a fingernail across his thumb hard enough to make it bleed. Pressing the thumb to the axe handle, the wood faded, turning a solid silver. The black blood disappeared off the weapon until it was pure and glittered in the dark. When he gave it back to me, I found the now silver axe light enough for my small body to handle. This is all I can do. You have to fight through this on your own. You may have a weapon now to increase your chances, but don't get cocky out there. And, I know this is hard to ask, but please don't kill those monsters if you don't need to. I don't like it when my creatures have senseless deaths. Killing for food is one thing, but... Gripping the new weapon in my hand, I found it steadily heavy again. Laren, whoever he was, cared about these creatures. He didn't want them to die if he could help it. He must have had a rough time being the one that killed the ones when they broke the rules. No wonder why he looked so tired and pained. I nodded at him and looked over at Katie. She still hadn't sat up. I wasn't even sure if she was aware of what was going on. If I died and she lived, she would never forgive me for leaving her. I just needed to make it for her sake. Giving them both one last look, I ran off back down the trail, new flashlight guiding the way. I didn't know where the farmhouse was, but I remembered hearing I just needed to follow the trail out and I would see it. I used up a lot of my strength running for a few minutes. Forcing to pace myself, I slowed down while looking for the yellow eyes in the dark, not feeling safe in the slightest. Shortly, I passed the spot where Stacy made her last stand. Tears threatened to make me stop. I didn't see any trace of her, only the bodies she left behind. Stepping around the scattered remains, I started breathing through my mouth, trying to get over the smell. When I got a few feet away from the area, I heard a crunching noise from behind me. Turning and shining my flashlight back and gasped, seeing 4 creatures in the middle of the trail. Long fingers snatching up pieces of the fallen, and sharp teeth tearing apart the dark flesh. They looked at me, but didn't stop eating. If the 4 stayed there, I only had 3 more to worry about somewhere off in the woods. Quickening my pace, I went on. Every sound put me on edge, sniffing the air to see if I could smell if any more of those monsters were coming closer to me. 10 minutes passed without any issues. I thought I saw some yellow eyes watching me in the woods, but they didn't approach. The silver axe might be keeping them away. After all, they had the bodies of my campmates and their fallen to eat. Why go for someone with a weapon when they had some free meals all over the place? I thought I was in the clear when a figure came out of the tree, stopping in front of me. I knew which one this was. It was the bastard that hurt Katie and the one that I smashed my flashlight on. One eye was closed and the other looked at me with such hate. I knew he wanted to eat my guts for the damage I had done to it before. It bolted towards me before I could move. A clawed arm grabbed my shirt, lifting me up as I swung the axe down on its shoulder. Letting out a scream, it tore the axe out, tossing it aside. Then, for some reason, it tossed me as well. I sat up and bruised to see that where I had struck it, the wound was burning and flaking the dark skin. I scrabbled in panic to where my axe was. Without any rational thought, I darted off into the woods with the thing screaming following behind. I dropped my flashlight and ran blind into the woods without any idea of what I was doing. I should have stayed on the path, but it was too late now. The thing was chasing me, wanting to kill me. I was injured, but I still didn't have much of a chance against it. I ran, feeling as if my legs would give up on me at any moment. Tears stung out of my eyes and branches cut my face. I ran for Katie's sake. The thing behind me stopped screaming, but I knew it was still after me. My heart leapt in my throat when I thought I saw something in front of me through the trees. A beam of light moving, confusing me on what it could be. Over my own breathing, I didn't hear any other noises, but my brain clicked to the fact that I just saw car headlights. I was near a road. I ran, chest threatening to burst. I tripped over a branch and rolled into the ditch alongside of the road I was so thankful for. Every muscle screamed at me as I got up and crawled out of the ditch towards the highway. It was late, but I knew it was a popular route for truckers. One would stop for me if someone would just please drive by. When I stood, it felt like I twisted my ankle. I dragged my body, almost passing out from the effort. Axe still in hand, I looked up and down the road frantic. A blow to my back tossed me rolling into the middle of the lane. I gasped for air, staring at the monster that just kicked me aside. My axe dropped too far for me to reach in time. It got on all fours, blood pouring from its wounded shoulder. I stared in horror, knowing this time was the end, just waiting for it to come for me. Yellow eyes glaring, it let out a long scream of hate at me as it dug its claws into the ground ready to pounce. I couldn't move my ragged body, and did the only thing I could think of. I screamed right back at it. Getting up on one elbow, I emptied out my lungs in a screech that made the thing not only stop from attacking me, but take a step back. We both stared each other down for a few seconds. Those few seconds might have saved my life. A blaring truck horn came from down the road. The creature looked over, seeing a transport truck coming right at it. Giving me one last look, it skittered back off into the woods. The next few hours were a muffled, frantic blur I still didn't fully remember to this day. The driver stopped to get me off the road and down to the farmhouse and to a phone. He went with the farmer into the woods to check on Katie, while I stayed at the house with the farmer's wife, going between crying and sleeping. Morning came around when I woke up. Dragging my tired body to the porch, I saw emergency crews scattered around the driveway and officers going on the trail. Someone told me that Katie was already on the way to the hospital and let me sit on a chair on the porch until another ambulance came for me. I sat, watching everyone run around trying to get a search started for the missing girls and Drew. I didn't know why no officers started to question me yet. I may have looked too out of it to be of any help. Someone did sat beside me to talk with me, though. I wasn't expecting so many of you to make it. Laren sat next to me, silver axe resting against the wooden rock chair he was in. I wanted to speak, but was too tired to say anything. I'm taking this axe with me. No offense, it's too powerful to leave it with you, unless you want my job. Pardon? I asked directly, my head towards him, trying to see if he was joking. Kings only last for 10 years, more if they're really strong. They need to switch bodies before it breaks down. I've been doing this for 5, and I would like to pass the crown on to someone else. It's too tiresome. I don't know why I agreed to do this in the first place. It's also too much of a burden to set up tests for other candidates, so I'm just going to ask anyone who survives a supernatural encounter if they want the gig. I stared at him, not believing his words coming out of his mouth. I didn't want to come across another monster or creature of the dark ever again. Having his job was way out of the question. This guy really needed to get some standards, too. He was asking a 13-year-old girl to take over such an important position. How lazy could one person be? If I could move, I would punch you for asking. I heard a small sound that was almost a laugh from him. I should have expected that answer. At least you don't need to worry about those monsters bothering you again. Any king candidates are off limits. If you weren't one, you're guaranteed to be killed by something supernatural someday because you encountered some. But I refused. I started and shut it up too late. That doesn't matter. You're still an honored human the king recognized. If you don't want my job, you could become a knight. It would mean that you would turn into some sort of creature, but you would not be under such strict rules about protecting humans as I am. Your friend Katie accepted that offer to turn when she's 18. I shot my head up. Katie agreed to be turned into something horrible like those things that attacked us? Like the things that killed everyone right in front of us? My knee-jerk reaction was anger, but the reason why she would agree to such a thing came to my mind. She was hurt badly, nearly died, and powerless to help me as I risked my life to save her. She may have wanted some sort of strength to ensure she would never feel like that again. You don't need to answer me right away. Hell, you could ask to become a knight or the next king right before your death, so just let it stay in the back of your mind. He stood up from the chair, axe over his shoulder, and stretched. I'm leaving, and I hope I never see you again. It wasn't the nicest goodbye, but I appreciated the thought left behind it. Standing up, I was ready to talk to the cops, even though I didn't have a good story for them. I stopped when Laren looked over towards the trail and gave a small, impressed whistle. Looks like I miscounted last night. What an embarrassing mistake. What I saw made me run past him and down the dirt driveway. Stacy was out of the trail, coming off of the trail, being guided by officers and wrapped in a blanket. She looked beaten up, but was still alive and walking. I didn't care about supernatural knights or kings. I only cared about getting to Stacy and hugging her for fighting so hard to save us.
About 15 years ago, when I was a part of the Boy Scouts, I had to participate in a 10-mile round-trip hike. My friends were in the troop were excited to participate, since the place that we'd be staying at would have a campsite that was on the lake. We began our hike late one Friday afternoon, when all of us were out of school. We would only have one scoutmaster with us, since the assistant scoutmaster was recently in a car wreck. We were in a much smaller troop than most scout troops, since we were church-based, and we had somewhat of a small congregation. The hike started at the base of a decently sized mountain that had a parking lot. Since the hike took place at the end of the summer, the parking lot was empty since most people were back at work or in school. We had planned this trip as a troop in order to have the lake to ourselves, and we could be as loud as we wanted. We started out our hike at 5 or so. The parking lot was empty, so we used the spaces available to lay out our stuff and organize it in a way that we could share the equal amount of weight, since we'd have to bring our troop chest with us that had cooking materials. The chest weighed around 60 pounds or so, and we had 2 unlucky scouts carry the chest, while the rest of the troop carried those scouts' personal backpacks. The hike started off without a hitch, and we were in fairly good shape, which made our ascent rather painless. Since we were in the mountains, the sun now began to set much more quickly behind the raised elevation. We were on the clock to get to our campsite before it got dark. On hikes, we either sang songs or told stories to make the time pass by, which was always a highlight of the trip. We figured that since we didn't see any cars in the parking lot, that we were the only people on the mountain, so we could be as loud as we liked. Little did we know that technically we would be correct, but we'd also come across something that was in fact not human. We continued to sing loudly and rather obnoxiously when we heard what sounded like the snapping of a small tree come from behind us. Around this time, the sun had set, but there was still an orange glow in the horizon. The summers were hot, and there were some trees that had dried and withered. We didn't stop when we heard the sound, but it did catch our attention. We still had another 3 miles, and we wanted to get to the campsite before it got dark. We pressed on in hopes that whatever was behind us would stay behind us. We were at the 4-mile mark when it got too dark for us to see without light. We had to take a small rest in order to get our flashlights out of our packs when we heard something coming from behind us not too far off. It wasn't the breaking of a small tree, but rather a loud roar. All of our flashlights quickly turned to the area where we thought we heard the sound. Some of us swore that they saw something very large and hairy duck behind a tree, but I didn't see anything. The scout leader stayed fixed on whatever was behind us. We had just hiked 4 miles into the woods, and it was now dark. The only way back was being blocked by something that we considered dangerous. We paused for a few minutes, waiting to see if whatever was behind us would try to come close, but it didn't. We snapped out of the trance and decided that the only way out of this would be to continue to our campsite, and hope that it wouldn't follow. We loaded our stuff back on, and we used the artificial light of our flashlights to guide us up the mountain. The thing with flashlights is that it doesn't come close to the light given off by the sun. Our journey was greatly hindered by this, and we were not able to see as clearly what laid before us, as well as behind. We hurried to our campsite in double time. The sounds behind us had stopped, but we continued as if whatever it was right behind us. Every now and then our scoutmaster would shine his flashlight behind us, but only for a moment. We continued the rest of the way without singing or anything. We were silent. We reached the lake, and by this time, it was completely dark out. We placed our stuff down and took a few minutes to relax. The speed in which we finished the last mile of our hike had exceeded what our young teenage bodies were capable of, and we pushed ourselves to the limits. Instead of resting with us, our scout leader began making a very large fire in order to light our campsite. We noticed that there was actually another set of campers on the other side of the lake, which made us feel much better about the situation. The scoutmaster got a good-sized fire going, and we were able to get our tents up and unpacked our stuff. The night was beautiful, but it was overshadowed with the fact that there was something in these woods. The troop got situated around the fire while warming up our dinners. We began to share our theories on what we thought we encountered in the woods. The theories ranged from Wendigos, the Goatman, Mothman, Yeti, and even an escaped serial killer from the nearby prison. My scoutmaster, a man who enjoyed horror, added to the conversation, rather than stopping it, getting us all the more worked up. He said,
I didn't want to tell you boys, but when I first heard the yell, I was able to turn around in time to see a large ape-like beast ducking behind the trees a good distance away.
Our eyes were wide, and we were silent.
If the creature is what I think it is, it's probably just a Bigfoot. From what I know about Bigfoot, they're typically not carnivorous, and they aren't aggressive. They don't like fire, so we need to keep this fire going as long as we can.
We nodded in agreement. The night went on, and even though we were tired, we didn't want to go to sleep. We took a vote on if we should have someone stay up with the fire, but due to the hike, we figured that it would be best for all of us to get some sleep. Even if that meant we had to let the fire die. We stayed up pretty late, like we normally did on campouts, and played games as a troop, but our brief yet terrifying encounter with the alleged Bigfoot had slowly faded from our minds, and we were now able to enjoy our evening. Time finally came that we decided for us to go to bed, and we put out the fire. We doused the fire and went to bed in our separate tents, hoping that we would have a peaceful night. I laid in my sleeping bag exhausted from the hike, but too nervous to fall asleep. I think that the troop felt the same way, since I would glance over to see my fellow troop members wide awake. Sleep eventually found its way into our minds, and I remember waking up to the distant scream of campers across the lake. Most of the troop began to wake, and I could hear them wrestling in their own tents. I rushed out of my tent and shined my light across the lake. My light was not able to shine across the lake, but the screams of the other campers continued. My scoutmaster finally emerged from his tent with his heavy-duty flashlight and illuminated the campsite to reveal a large hairy beast running back into the woods. Me and the other scouts that were out at the time were stunned to see our first exposure to the Bigfoot. It was a good distance away, but I could tell that it was tall, and it moved rather quickly for its size. My scoutmaster restarted the fire and told us that we were going to be okay, that he was going to stay up with the fire. Due to the terror that we experienced that night, we were not able to sleep, and the next thing we knew, it was morning. I got up and left my tent and glanced across the lake to see that the campers had packed up and left. We were now alone in the woods. Once everyone was up, our scoutmaster informed us that we would be leaving that day and that we would need to pack up immediately. We packed up and hiked our way back with no other interactions with the Bigfoot. Thankfully, the interactions that we did have were quite small and not necessarily threatening to us. But it did open my eyes to the fact that there are definitely more out there in the woods that we may know. My father passed away when I was young, and I don't really have any memory of him. My mother talks of him highly, and I like to think that he was an honorable man. My father was somewhat well off due to his family having a lot of money, so when he passed, my mother was in an okay spot financially, although she missed him terribly. She met my now stepdad, Terry, at a church function, and they hit it off. Terry has 2 kids, one older and one younger than me, so when our families meshed, it was somewhat natural of a transition. I didn't really speak to Terry much, but he was always a very level-headed guy. He never yelled and was always easy to be around. I remember one Friday coming home from school and seeing Terry load the family van with camping gear. For reference, I'm a teenage girl and still in high school. As you can imagine, the idea of camping was awful since I never really went before. I went into the house ignoring Terry and went to my mother and asked her what was going on. She told me that Terry was wanting to get to know me better, so he wanted to take me and Ryan, his son who was 3 years younger than me, out camping. Wait, you're not going? I said in frustration. This was so unfair. As a young girl, I felt extremely uncomfortable to be out in the woods with Terry, or at least that's what I told my mother, in hopes that she wouldn't make me have to go. She didn't buy it since they've been together for 10 years now, and that I clearly just didn't want to go camping. I went and packed my things in my room while brooding, when Ryan came in very excited. "Casey, we get to go camping. Isn't this awesome?" I didn't respond and kept packing, doing my best to let everyone know around me that I was frustrated. Ryan was unfazed by my angst and continued to bubble with excitement the entire time I packed. I finally finished and went outside with Ryan close behind me and put my stuff in the car. Terry saw me and approached me with a wide smile and told me that we were going to have a blast this weekend. I gave an unenthusiastic response and he nodded with a slight disappointment. He told me that, if you want, we can cancel the trip, but I think that Ryan was really looking forward to this and that he'd be disappointed. I just want to hang out with you guys. Terry's authentic response let me know that he was really making an effort and getting to know me and to be with his kids. I decided to change my attitude for Ryan. "Let's go camping," I said with a grin, and Terry responded with an even wider grin. "Great," he said. My mother was an on-call nurse, so she wouldn't be able to make it, and Terry's oldest child was now in college a few states over, so it would just be me, Terry, and Ryan. The ride seemed long, but after checking the time, we were only about 20 minutes away. The place that we were at was at the edge of town, at a place I'd never been before. Terry told me that his father used to take him here when he was younger. Ryan was still excited and kept checking with me to see if I was excited as he was, which I gave a convincing performance. The campsite was next to where we parked, and we were able to set up camp rather quickly. The area was pretty well covered with woods, and the night sky was no longer obscured by the light pollution of the city. I'd never seen the night sky so clearly before. It was really an eye-opening experience for me. There was so much in the sky that I'd never seen before, and I was now glad that I went camping. Ryan, being young and full of childhood stories, wanted to go snipe hunting in the woods with me and Terry. I knew that snipes weren't obviously real, but I indulged Ryan and Terry. We took off into the night with flashlights looking for snipes. We obviously didn't find any, but we had a good time. After 15 minutes or so of hunting, we decided to call it a night and turn back. At this moment, I realized that the sky was giving off more light than normal. Normally, I figured that some cloud was obscuring the moon, and it had dissipated, but I looked up to see 3 large lights, hovering where I figured our campsite would be. These lights had to be attached to some type of aircraft, but I couldn't hear any sound coming from the lights. The lights just hovered silently before descending in the woods. Terry and I locked eyes as we saw the same thing. Ryan was oblivious and was still looking on the ground for snipes. We turned back to camp to see that the car lights and radio was on. There was no sign of the lights or the ship that held them, but this was cause for concern. Terry hopped into the car to see if it would start, but nothing. Whatever had flown by must have messed up our electrical components, and the car would now no longer start. Terry, being the chill guy that he was, said that the battery must have died and all we would need was a jump, which we could easily get. This put me at ease, but I was still nervous about what I saw not too long ago. Having been somewhat worked up, I still found it rather easy to sleep. However, the sleep would only bring me haunting memories for years to come. While I was sleeping, I dreamt I was looking at myself in third person. I was hovering over my body while I slept, and the lights returned. I blacked out during my dream, but I remember bits and pieces of it more I think about it. The lights returned and these gray-looking aliens exited the craft and entered our tent. Everyone was asleep, but these aliens had some way of keeping us unconscious. I then blacked out and came to, except I was still watching myself in third person. I was laying on a silver table, and the aliens are examining me. The room was dark except for one light that shined right on me. I could see in the corner of this room that there were these large containers filled with this green liquid that appeared to hold these creatures I had never seen before. These creatures had large claws and teeth, but seemed to be sedated. These creatures were unlike anything I'd ever seen on this world. The gray aliens then touch me with this wand, and everything goes back to black. I wake up, but not inside of my tent, but rather a hospital bed. I'm confused, but thankfully my mother and Terry are by my side. My head hurts, but other than that, I feel fine. They filled me in with what had happened when we were camping, and I must have sleptwalked because when Terry and Ryan woke, I was nowhere to be found. They said that I had been missing for 3 days and only found me after they had contacted the local police and sent a search party. I was found in a field 13 miles away, which baffled police and my family. I wish this was where my story ended, but unfortunately it's not. My encounters with the extraterrestrials would continue. I would periodically have reoccurring nightmares about events, but also new dreams that were very similar in the next couple of years. Thankfully, whenever I wake up from these dreams, I wake up in my bed, rather than the next town over. But I'm still inclined to believe that not only have I been visited by extraterrestrials, but I think they visit me frequently. I can somewhat anticipate when they're going to come, but nothing ever keeps them away for good.